A lot of people on this were registered for today, which is so great. AI, it's where everything's going. It's a buzzword, obviously, right now. And I think everyone's kind of trying to figure out what to do, where to go, how to, really navigate those things, especially with tribes, which we'll talk about today. I'm really excited for this one. So again, everyone, thank you for attending. My name is Michelle with the TribalHub team. We are here today thanks to our special partners, our webinar partners today, Arctic IT. Presenters today, Greg and Phillip. I'll let them give their bios when they start their presentation. As a reminder, this session will be recorded on tribalhub.com, and you will also receive a copy of the recording tomorrow afternoon. So please feel free to share that with anyone on your team who maybe didn't make it today but would love to learn this information. Some learning objectives to take away from this webinar. Just keep these in mind when you're listening to the presentation, and be sure to use that chat box for questions. We really want this to be interactive. AI is new to everybody, so all the questions would be wonderful. If you don't want to use the chat box, you can message individuals, or you can also use the Q&A feature that is within Zoom. And a reminder, what's up here at TribalHub? We have our big 25th anniversary conference happening this year in Vegas. If you need information, again, hop over to our website. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn this over to the Arctic IT team.
We are good to go. We can see your screen, Greg. So yeah, there's a little bit of an intro video here as we get started. Excited to have everybody here talk about AI. All right, well, welcome everybody. Today we want to talk about navigating risk in the AI era for tribal nations. We know that this is a hot topic. As Michelle said, everybody's just trying to figure out really what's going on. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of smoke, and we're just trying to, help tribal nations kind of figure out where they should start, what things they should be paying attention to as it relates to AI. So excited to kick it off and get started today. My name is Phillip Jackson. I am the CIO here at Arctic IT. Been here for about 6 years. I am a member of the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma, so proud member there. And with me, I have Greg Starling, who is head of Emerging Technologies Group at Doyon Technology Group, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But Greg has been in the AI space for, Greg, how long?
Depends on what you mean. Generative AI space for about 4 years, but messing with AI in general for close to 20.
Yeah, so Greg is definitely the expert here, but we're excited to bring some AI things that you can do right away and things that you can bring to your organization right now. So let's talk about what today's agenda looks like. First of all, a little bit about our background, letting you know that we are a partner who understands tribal nations and doing business in tribal nations. A little bit of an introduction to AI. That will just help kind of everybody get a baseline, because we all see it in the news every single day, but like, what do all these terms mean? Where is it going? How did we get here? All of that we'll cover in the introduction to AI. We're here to talk about not all AI tools are created equal. So there's AI tools popping up every single day. There's a landscape of all kinds of companies trying to do AI. So where should you start, and how do you kind of tackle this elephant? How to mitigate AI risk. So there's a lot of risk. I think that's probably one of the number one things, Greg, I hear a lot is people like, how do I mitigate my risk as an organization? And we're going to help you with that today. And then where to start. So again, one of the biggest questions we get is like, okay, I see the importance, I see where it's going, but how do I even get started within my org around AI? And then, of course, we'll leave some time for Q&A. So first off, a little bit about us, Arctic IT, and a partner who understands you. First of all, we are 100% native owned. We are owned by ANC Doyon Limited. We have more than 15 years experience in tribes, working with tribes all across the United States, over 90 different tribal entities across this United States. And we're really focused. We know what we do well, and we know what we don't do well, but we know that we can help tribal governments, help casinos with their cloud-based solutions. So spend just a little bit of time on this because maybe you've been a client of ours, or you know a little bit about us, and now you're wondering who this Doyon Technology Group is. Doyon Technology Group is a subsidiary of Doyon. It's a newly created entity. And that's just as we're growing. We want to be able to focus in different areas. So Arctic IT is the Arctic IT you've known for about 20 years, still doing work in tribal nations. We've also have Arctic IT Government Solutions, which is more focused on federal governments and state governments, Arctic IT. And then we have a sister company called Design Data, which focuses on association technology. So all of that just falls under the Doyon Technology Group. So just a little bit to let you know. You can see from this map, we again do work with tribes all across this country, coast to coast, and including in Alaska. And here you can just see some of the partners that we work with. Certainly just a representative sample. Some of you might be on this call, or some of these logos might look familiar to you, but we've been doing this for quite some time. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Greg.
Yeah, so I'm gonna kick off here and just kind of talk through a little bit of what AI looks like. Hopefully demystify it a little bit. It is not probably as complicated as people want to make it out to be sometimes. So we're going to try to talk through and give you all a really solid basis for what AI actually is, and how you can start to use it within your organizations. So there are a few terms that we may use throughout this presentation. Wanted you to be aware of those, and because they're pretty common in the space. Generative AI is what, whenever Phillip earlier said, you know, how long have you been doing this? That's kind of the generative AI is what everybody's talking about now. That's the ChatGPT, the Microsoft Copilot. That is where we're taking a whole bunch of information and then spitting out content. That's what generative AI is. Large language models are kind of the systems that underlie those generative systems. That's a large language model runs a generative AI system. Training data, that's the data that all of the large language models, these kind of all build on each other. That's all the information that the large language models need to be able to actually start to understand how these things work together. Hallucinations, that is a really euphemistic way of saying the AI will just make things up. And so you may hear somebody in the AI space talk about hallucinations. What they're saying there is the AI is spitting out some data, spitting out some information that is incorrect. And so usually because either the training data was off, maybe the input wasn't as specific as it should have been. These are getting better and better, and they'll continue to get better and better, but they absolutely happen. And we'll talk a little bit about risk mitigation and how to make sure when those do happen, you can catch it, and maybe some ways to not do it. Ethics, AI ethics, you cannot sit on a AI call of any size, AI conference of any size, and not hear somebody talk about, or a lot of people talk about ethics. There's a lot of ethics in how we want to go about doing this. Phillip's going to talk a little bit later about specifically how some of the First Nations, Indigenous people maybe are excluded to an extent, and how we can incorporate some of those back in. And then also talk a little bit about RAG. RAG is kind of like one of those acronyms like NASA or SCUBA, where you sometimes forget what it even means, but technically it's retrieval augmented generation. That is just the process of taking a large language model and then augmenting it with your information to make it more accurate, reduce those hallucinations. The term that people use in the AI a lot is grounding it. So you're grounding that output to things that you know to be true, to be factual, whether that could be something like your employees' time off type cards. It could be IT support tickets that you've done over time. It could be any number of things that you want to augment the system with, that you have kind of your data that creates your secret sauce, or actually kind of allows your AI to be more tailored to what you're looking to do.
Yeah. So Greg, I mean, I know there's a lot of jargon and we've, been talking about AI for some period of time. So let's like talk about a couple of these. So like
Okay.
to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but like to me, large language model is more akin to like the software or the program. Like if we were talking about databases, we might be talking about SQL Server or Oracle Server or whatever. So maybe the analogous thing is you can have this large language model. It's not all of the data as you're talking about kind of RAG that you might put into it or help with, but that it's really, there's several of them out there, whether we're talking about ChatGPT, there's Meta, there's Gemini, all of those kinds of things. Large language model to me feels like kind of the program that you could use for AI.
Yeah, I
Is
think
that
that's yeah, I think that's a really good way to think about it. So, um, ChatGPT's large language model is called GPT 4.0. And so that's I think exactly right because we call it ChatGPT when we're talking about it. Or we call it like Microsoft's Copilot or Copilot 365 to be a little more accurate. And I think what we kind of maybe obfuscate a little bit there is there is that large language model underneath it that is the program that's kind of running in. So that's all that we talk about training data. That's all that training data that they've used to create these underlying language models. That gives it like the semantics, the ability to kind of create those sentences and put those things together. And then, yeah, to your point, then we augment it with some of our own things through that RAG process.
Yeah, and I get a lot of questions about training. What does that mean, training data? Like every prompt that everything I type in there, is that
Yeah, yeah, that's a
RAG
good
stuff that
question.
I'm putting in there? What like people are really worried about their data leaking out, right?
Yeah,
And so
and
that's what we talk about when we're talking about training data.
yeah, so we're going to get a little deeper into that as we get further into the kind of the presentation here when we talk about mitigating some risk. But just to kind of touch on it right now, training data is the information that these companies, whether it's Microsoft or OpenAI or Amazon or Meta or whomever, it's the information that they have trained their systems on. For the most part, that has been internet data. They have, in a lot of ways, just eaten the entire internet. You might see in the news, it seems like almost every week now, one of these companies is making a deal with a content provider, whether it's Reddit or Stack Overflow or some of the newspapers like the Wall Street Journal. There are a lot of these deals getting made because they are running out of training material. That's the problem. They've eaten it all. So they're trying to figure out some other places. But when we talk about like the data that we input, I mean, the short way to think about it is if you're on a free model, you're on a model that you're not paying for, they are going to use your information to train the model. And if you're on a paid version of that, they're not. That has really changed over the last 2 to 3 months because 6 months ago, I would not have said that because even most of the paid models were training on that input data. But now there's been a lot of pushback, which is understandable from organizations saying, hey, I want to put in some sensitive things in here. I want to put in some things that are proprietary to me. I don't want that to become part of the training data set. And all these companies have listened and they basically said, hey, if you're using our free version, that's the cost of doing business. You are the product, right? There's always a product. And so if you're using the free version, the way you're paying for that is with your information. If you're on a paid version, they're keeping that private pretty much across all companies now, and they're not training on your data if you're paying for it.
Good to know. Thanks.
Yeah. So Philip did say at the beginning, like, ask me how long I've been doing this. I am old. I didn't start in the 1950s though, or the 80s, but this has been around for a very long time. So AI has been around for since the 1950s. I think really ChatGPT in a lot of ways brought this very much forward into the future, but really, I personally got involved in the late 90s into the early 2000s when we started learning more about neural networks and how AI can kind of imitate a human brain. So again, like these breakthroughs are just building on top of each other. This isn't something that came out whenever ChatGPT came out. What ChatGPT did is it created a really easy user interface for normal people to be able to go in and start to create things. But we've had a lot of these types of systems in place, but the really big breakthrough came in 2017. And this is whenever researchers at Google came up with this concept of a deep learning transformer, and that allowed it to start to analyze enormous amounts of data and start to understand a little bit and become a little more aware of the data that's underlying it. And then you may have heard of GPT, as in Chat GPT. That actually means something. It's a generative pre-trained transformer. And this came out in 2018. It built on that deep learning transformer concept that started to learn on just enormous amounts of data, like unfathomably large amounts of data. And then you can really see here, I actually can't because it's covered by the list of people, but you can see here how quickly it's almost an order and a half or 2 orders of magnitude every year or two. And my understanding from talking to people, this is a GPT-5, which could well come out this summer. Well, nobody really knows, but will be another significant leap here. So again, I think that the takeaway here is AI is scary, and that's fair. Like whenever I talk to people, there are some real things we should all be concerned about with AI. AI is also exciting. There's a lot of really cool things that we can do with AI, but AI is not new. AI is not, it's the way it's being used might be novel, the way it might be being implemented is interesting, but AI basically all works the exact same way.
Yeah. So I mean, Greg, like, I don't know if you can go back just a slide.
Yeah.
Like, so, I mean, I think most people think when you go to rules-based processing, you think about how computers work. If do this, then do that. Like, it's a very defined path, right? Like, there might be a lot of paths, but there's, it's a defined path. And then we had machine learning, and I remember going to something in the early 2000s where it's like, oh, this is a dog, this is a dog, this is a dog, and show it a picture and be like, this is a dog. And I'm like, that's not really that cool. Like, I know what a dog. And then we kind of got to neural networks. And I think that's really where things start to change, where it starts to kind of learn, through pathways. Just like if I was telling you a story and I was telling you about going fishing, in Alaska or something like that, I might tell you that story differently than a person in Alaska who goes fishing all the time. Same story, just different neural pathways depending on the context and that kind of stuff. And then you kind of see all of these things, these rules, these classifications, all of this kind of come together in the last couple of years. That's really, oh, wow, this is way different than what I thought.
Yeah. And I think the one thing you were talking about that's a dog, that's not that interesting. And I agree that was not that interesting, but to your point of how that's kind of built on top of everything, now generative AI is significantly better. So I was at a government conference a couple of months ago, Department of Defense conference, and they were talking about geospatial intelligence and how analyzing images for the military, seeing troop movements or things popping up and down, how that stuff that used to be it's a dog, it's a dog, it's a dog is now this is a new troop movement, or they've set up a new base here. And it was, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 75% faster than people at identifying troop movements and import what the Department of Defense considered important pieces. And it was also 90% faster. So we're getting, 90% more accurate. So you're getting more accurate results faster. And so that they're all just kind of building on each other. And then we're kind of coming up on some really interesting things that we can do now.
Yeah, if it hadn't been for it's a dog, we wouldn't be here.
That's right. That's right. So and I think the thing is, and Philip, I'll let him talk. I think he's got a really good kind of analogy here on pattern recognition, but AI is really simple in its baseline. What it does is it just looks at an enormous amount of data, like an enormous amount of information, and identifies patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe Phil, you can maybe give that example. I really liked you were talking about the other day.
So if I said to you, Greg, not all heroes wear, what would you say?
Capes.
Capes. When it rains, it
pours.
The sun will come out
tomorrow.
Yeah, you're doing AI. I mean, at its simplest form, that's really what AI is doing. It's just trying to predict what happens. But because it's looked at so much data, it can tell like what is going to happen next. And whether you're talking about the next pixel, if it's trying to generate an image, or the next word, it all kind of works the same way. So that's
even so, and that's the cool thing too, is it learns without explicit programming. Like you don't have to tell it what to learn. So there's a lot of adversarial networks that where one computer system is trying to create an image that looks like a human, and the other computer system is trying to tell if it's computer generated or not. And so it's sending over computer generated and actual pictures of humans, and they're kind of competing. And that's how it's learning and getting better, and starting to realize how to create these networks that are better. So it's recognizing patterns, figuring out, hey, this is what it needs to look like, and then it's learning on top of that, and it's processing at speeds that are really incomprehensible to us, just incredibly rapid. But I think the interesting thing here is once you understand what it's doing, this pattern recognition, learning, and processing, you can say, well, that doesn't matter if it's an electric vehicle like a Tesla or a Leaf or whatever you might be driving. That's using the exact same concept. It's okay, there's a car here, there's lanes here, recognizing patterns and figuring out how to process and do that, whether it's an image that's being generated or whether it's text that's being created. So they all AI basically works the same kind of once you understand it. So I think that's what I mean whenever I say like AI is not overly complicated, it's just really sophisticated. And so it can do some really interesting things, but once you kind of understand how it works underneath, you get a pretty good idea of like, oh, I understand how we get from here to there. So, and in fact, you're probably using AI and you may not even know it. I'll just kind of pick a few of these here. Anytime you're seeing predictive text and email or text messaging, that is AI. Banking fraud detection is enormous amounts of AI looking for anomalies or things that are not doing, not how they should be. Probably what we do think of a lot are chatbots. Most chatbots now are AI. If you're using things like Google Translate, it is using AI. Spam filters, facial recognition. I love what Photoshop is doing with some of their photo enhancements and their AI features to remove things from photos. So we're all using AI all over the place, and you just may not be aware of it because maybe you're saying, well, I'm not using ChatGPT, or I don't have software developers or data scientists internal on my team that are trying to figure out how to program these types of things. But we're probably all using it a whole lot more than we actually realize. So been around a long time, not overly complicated. We all use it a lot.
Yeah, I think it'll be a layer in almost everything as we go forward, right? Like it's just going to be more and more of a layer.
Yeah, we were at a conference. Phil and I were a Microsoft developer build conference a few weeks ago, and one thing that I thought they said that really kind of struck me is, and it might have been Sam Altman that said this, but they were saying, whenever the internet first got big, late 90s, mid to late 90s, people were saying, well, I'm an internet company. Well, nobody says that now. Everybody is an internet company. Then whenever the App Store came out in the early 2010s, with the Apple App Store, then obviously the Google Play Store after that, people said, well, we're a mobile company. Well, nobody says that now, right? Everybody needs to be mobile and you need to be able to work. And right now there's a lot of companies that are saying they're AI companies, but that's not going to be a distinction here in a couple of years. Everybody's going to be an AI. And I think, Phil, to your point, it's going to be a layer on everything that we're doing. So this is probably why you are here today, is understanding how we can use it internally, how we can use it in our companies to make it better. And so for a long time, we talked about like shadow IT. There were IT groups inside of your organization that were they're not IT, not directly under IT, but they were doing IT things. That is absolutely happening now with AI. AI is, you might have banned AI or said, hey, slow the brakes, pump the brakes a little bit on AI, let's slow down. But the odds are that your employees are not pumping the brakes. Your employees are probably using this. I have a good friend who is a chief of staff for a very large bank that you would all recognize. And the bank stopped the use of AI internally. And so now she just does all the work on her phone, AI related. So because she said, I don't have the budget to hire more people, and AI is doing the work of three extra people for me on my team. So her team is now, again, kind of using a shadow AI that's not at all what we want. So we need to come up with good policies and good things in place so we can let people use these tools that they're going to use. Because right now, 75% of workers, office workers, are using AI. And of that 75%, about 4 out of every 5 of them are bringing their own AI tools to work, whether they're paying for their own ChatGPT subscription, or worse, they're not paying for a ChatGPT subscription. They're using free ChatGPT or free Google Gemini or Meta to get their thing, but they're putting proprietary information in there. Maybe they're paying for things like Grammarly or Photoshop or those types of things. 78%, so almost 4 out of every 5 of these people who are using AI in your organization, and they are using AI in your organization, are doing it through tools that your team is probably not aware of or has approved. There's real reasons why they're doing this, right? So 90% of people who use AI at work say it saves them time. 85% say it lets them focus on things that are important, focus on the things that are important, and offload some of those things that aren't as important. 84% say it makes them more creative. And 83%, this is a huge thing when we're talking about like employee productivity, employee performance. We want the people that work with us to be happy. 83% of people that use AI say they enjoy work more. And I would say for me personally, I would take all these boxes. I use AI pretty much all day, every day. And sometimes it can be absolutely frustrating. I was super frustrated at it yesterday, but at the same time, it makes my life so much better. I cannot imagine going back to a place of not using some of these generative tools on a daily basis. So again, of the people that are using AI, they're probably not telling you. There's a reason for that, right? People are worried about losing their jobs, or worried about thinking that their jobs aren't important. And so they're not going to say that they're using it for their most important tasks, but they almost certainly are. And again, it's because it makes them feel like they're replaceable.
Yeah, Greg, I know that when I've given this talk, I have a lot of employees who come up to me after and like, how do I convince my boss to, let me use AI kind of thing. And I
Yeah,
have a lot of managers going like, how do I know what my employees are doing? So there's obviously some kind of disconnect that's going on in the
right.
workplace right now.
Yeah, I think the organizations that are most successfully implementing AI are the organizations that have both top down and bottom up. Like they have employees that are excited about it and wanting to use it, but they also have that management layer that's saying, yeah, we're excited about this too. We want to make sure we use it right. And then, because whenever it's not kind of behind the scenes, when it's not this like shadowy thing or secret thing, you get to start sharing best practices. You get to start talking to other people inside the organization. I spent a lot of time last night working on a GPT with a coworker. That's because we use AI so much internally, and we were able to get something really cool done together that we could have never got done apart. And so it's really nice to be able to get these tools up and running in an organization, supported by the management, supported by the senior leaders, but also finding those people who are excited about it. And there are certainly people excited about it in your organizations. That being said, not all tools are created equal. So there are 2 main types of systems that people tend to use. They're private AI and public AI systems. So a private AI, when we're talking about something like that, we're talking about something that is built bespoke, specific to your organization. We're not talking about you're paying for something that's mass produced. It's something that is very, very specific to your internal team. So these are very, very expensive to build. I mean, say very expensive, thousands to potentially millions of dollars. So I've seen them being built in the 20 to 30-ish $1,000 range that can do most of what you want them to do. The great thing about a private AI is it is incredibly high security, because it's very difficult for people to get in. It's only accessible inside. And so this works for people in incredibly high security environments, things like financial environments, some hospitals, people that are concerned with HIPAA and some of the patient type things build private AIs. A lot of law firms build their own kind of internal private AIs. For the vast majority of us, like people like us here at Arctic and Doyon, public AI is what we use, and it's what most people can use. So everybody has access to it. It has a relatively low cost. It can be free. That's why the data security here is low. I'd probably put it at medium if we were only talking about the paid versions, maybe even high. But you have it's much more cost effective, but you can't customize it too much, right? You can make in Microsoft, you can make your own co-pilots, which are your own kind of bots or agents. You can create your own GPTs inside of ChatGPT, but you don't have quite the level of just customization that you have with a private.
So there's lots of models out there, right? We talk about ChatGPT as kind of the 500-pound gorilla, so to speak.
Sure.
But there's lots of smaller language models. There's the Llama, which is open source. So the private is more like I pull down a model myself, install it into my environment, and then customize it the way I want, right? And not so beholden to whatever the software as a service has decided the direction that they want to go. Is that kind of
Yeah.
accurate? Like
Yeah, I think
versus
that's a good way to put it. I also think you mentioned Llama, which Llama is an incredibly good open source large language model. But I think one of the cool things about doing private versions is you can have very specific small language models. So if, for example, you have a help desk, a specific, and I'll just use that as an example, but it could be anything that's interesting or unique or custom to your organization. You can have a small language model that's trained very specifically on just those types of questions. And so the first thing routes the type of question to what language model. And so that's where private AI systems can get much faster, because if you're asking it like, what's the capital of France? It can give you just back very quickly Paris without having to think about it because it's using a small language model that's just fact-based. Whereas the public AI models are all generative, they take a little longer. So yeah, I think that's the right way to think about it, Philip, is like there are with the private versions, you can have a lot of kind of underlying models that are behind what you want to do. And then you can customize it as you see fit to kind of your specific environment. So again, we're mostly going to talk about generative AI tools. That's what almost everybody in the workforce, whether it's public or private, government, most everybody are using these popular generative AI tools. So the models on the left, and you see Anthropic, you probably are not as familiar with Anthropic as you are maybe with some of those other organizations. Anthropic is backed by Amazon. So if we were to put Amazon maybe behind there, that might look a little more impressive. But the cool thing about the ones on the left, the four on the left, is there are paid versions. And so we mentioned that free models train on your data and introduce an input risk. And when we're talking about input risk, we're talking about the possibility that somebody on your team might put something in a system that is proprietary, that is private, that you don't want getting out there, and all of a sudden it's in the corpus of data that it's training on. So one thing actually that Phil said to me a long time ago that I really kind of liked is like, these are often like picking your horse. You know, if you're just trying to play around with it, you're trying to work on some of the different systems. Maybe you want to try the OpenAI's ChatGPT or Microsoft's Copilot, or if you're in a Google environment, Google Gemini, there's reasons potentially to use Claude. There are all some pros and cons to all these. But really, you ought to standardize on what free one you're going to try with, and feel free to try a bunch, but that's usually the horse that you're going to ride, because there's too much cost to switching from an environment you're really familiar with in the free version and then into a paid version. So that's a negative of Meta's AI. So Meta's AI is outstanding, and that's kind of one of the bummers of it is better than the free versions of all of its competitors, but it is not as good as any of the paid versions. And so there's no path for Meta to a more advanced paid version. So I personally would recommend not using Meta just because of the input risk that we're
Yeah, it's really just like you said. I mean, if you're in a Microsoft environment today and you're all Microsoft all of the time, probably doesn't make any sense to use Google Gemini, right? Like, and the inverse of that is true. So it's like you said, it's about kind of learning how one tool works and kind of riding that horse and just getting better all the time.
Yeah. So, and here we have strengths and weaknesses, and you can see there on the security, none of these train on your data. Again, this exact slide 3 months ago, that far right column would not be like that, because those are some changes that some of the companies have made relatively recently. So just as far as strengths, OpenAI, the ChatGPT, it is the most advanced model. It always gets, so Microsoft ends up running some when you invest $10 billion in a company like Microsoft did with OpenAI, you do get a lot of their information. And so Microsoft is backed behind all of the Microsoft AI is actually running OpenAI's ChatGPT type infrastructure. It's just with OpenAI, you're getting it quicker, and maybe quicker doesn't matter. It probably doesn't matter because we're usually talking 4 to 6 weeks at most. So it's not that big of a deal. But if you kind of want some of the latest and greatest versions, and that's really important to your team, ChatGPT has the latest and greatest versions. It does not integrate natively. And so again, like Phillip was saying, if you're in a Microsoft environment and you want AI to exist inside of Outlook, you want AI to exist inside of Teams, Excel, PowerPoint, those types of things, you want to go with Microsoft Copilot because it is directly integrated into those things. Now, on the other hand, OpenAI has a standalone widget that just sits out on the side and is kind of available everywhere. So Microsoft is incredibly good inside of the Microsoft environment. And I would not have said that probably a month ago, but it is getting leaps and bounds better almost every week. And it's gotten to the point where I say it's very good inside of a Microsoft environment. But if like Phil said, if you're in Google Docs a lot, or you're doing some more open source type infrastructure, you'll lose all the advantages that Microsoft Copilot. So it wouldn't necessarily be the best choice there. Anthropic's Claude, it sounds the best, and I know that's a subjective, not an objective thing, but it's pretty much everybody agrees in the subjective space. It sounds really good. I personally use Claude to help me write articles, blogs, things like that. And I'll kind of bounce it back and forth just because I think it sounds better. But again, it is like OpenAI. There are no native integrations. And if you are a Google, you use G Suite, right? You use Google, Gmail, Sheets, things like that. Gemini gives you the same advantages in that environment that Copilot gives you in a Microsoft environment. And just like Copilot, if you're not in a Google environment, Gemini is probably not a very good option for you. So now getting into some of the risks, right? So input risks, that's where you're putting hopefully not you, and hopefully not your employees, but possibly your employees are putting things that might put you at a competitive disadvantage. So whether that's some proprietary information, some plan that you have going on, could be PII or HIPAA type things. There was an enormous thing that happened a few months back at one of the, I think it was 23andMe, where they were using a version that did not obfuscate and then save the information. And so all of these individuals' information was getting put in by an employee, and where they thought they were going in to get a big pat on the back for being able to come up with some really cool things, because they were. Generative AI is incredibly, incredibly good at being able to look at unstructured data and find patterns. But what they were actually getting in trouble about was you leaked our entire, user base out into the system. So input risks are just employees putting things into systems that you are concerned would be public. I wouldn't say it's like we used to talk about with email, like don't put anything in email that you don't want on the front page of the New York Times. It's not like to that extreme, but it is very much like if you're in a free environment, you are putting things into a system that is turning into training data, and anything that is training data can be resurfaced. So that is something to be aware of. So using tools that expressly do not store or use your data, again, those are all the paid tools. I would be, unless you're just kicking tires and testing things, I would say you should never use a free version of a generative AI tool, just because you're not going to think about it and you're going to get used to it and you're going to accidentally put something in there that you shouldn't. Again, testing is one thing, but I also say be careful with testing, because the paid versions are usually significantly better than the free version. So that should be part of your testing too. And also establishing just data governance policies and regularly audit those policies, making sure we'll talk a little bit about why you should have an AI policy. And I think at the end, there's even a takeaway where we can send you a template of an AI policy that we've created that you can tweak to kind of make your own. But making sure you're not using a tool that's storing data and making sure that even if this tool says it's not storing your data, there's still maybe even some things that you don't necessarily want in them. And so that'll vary from organization to organization. So that's just something you all need to kind of work through with your teams. Output risks. And so I mentioned hallucination earlier. You need a human in the loop. That is the best way to fix that. And so anything, if you're the risk is low if you're talking about creating an email, writing a blog post for social media, writing a post that you're going to put on LinkedIn, something like that. That risk is low. If you're using AI to make something like a housing decision or who you're going to lend money to or not, that risk is significantly higher, and you absolutely need a human in the loop to fact check. Also, there's no real probably quicker way to undermine like that you know what you're talking about than there's some quote in the middle of your blog post that's not actually a quote. And so just make sure you fact check those things. There's a funny story that I'll just quickly touch on where maybe it wasn't funny. It probably wasn't funny to anybody involved, but a lawyer used ChatGPT to come up with court cases. The ChatGPT found 5 court cases. Lawyer submits to judge. Judge says 3 of these look great. 2 of these are totally made up. The lawyer says, well, I didn't make them up. ChatGPT did. He says, I don't care. You made them up. You're the one that turned it in. You're in contempt. You get fined. And so the lawyer's fined and in trouble. So it absolutely makes things up. And if it's really important, you need somebody there to verify those things and have those real clear lines of accountability when we're making AI solutions. So with private tools, there are a couple of issues here. And again, we'll just quickly touch on this because most people are probably not going to use private AI tools, but incorrect or outdated responses. So since the companies are not constantly updating the information, you probably have your own information into these systems. Incorrect or outdated responses can be a problem. A good example of that would be something even like holiday schedule, since holidays change from year to year. Somebody goes in and says, hey, what days am I off this year for holidays? It might give a totally wrong response if you haven't updated your latest versions. Inferior underlying models. So this is when you really need to know what you're doing or partner with somebody who really knows what they're doing, because there are some models that are really good. And there's a lot of benchmarking tools out there that you can go and look at. And there's some models that are not nearly as good. And so if you're using your AI to help you make decisions, you want to make sure you're using the best thing. And then, of course, data breaches. The concern here is they're your own systems. Microsoft is really, really good at hardening their systems, and you would likely run this on a cloud, whether that's inside of Microsoft's Azure, Amazon's AWS, or Google's cloud. But still, data breaching is a bigger risk with an AI tool that you're running in-house versus an AI tool that you're using. So you want to augment the base model's data, keep the data updated, update the LLM, the underlying LLM, and then just make sure you have best practices and you're not putting yourself in a tough situations. So with that, I'm going to flip it over to Phil, because there's a lot of things when we're talking about biases and ethics that are really important, that are more specific to the tribal environment that he's pretty familiar with.
Yeah, so as we start to talk about tribal nations and LLMs and that kind of thing, if you think about what Greg's been talking about, how these LLMs are trained on just massive amounts of internet data. When you think about like who's putting information out there on the internet, well, the internet was kind of invented by the military, and then a lot of the first uses were there in California, Silicon Valley, that kind of stuff, the commercial internet that we know today. And so I just say, like, be careful, because the internet underrepresents many cultures and groups of people. If these LLMs are trained on internet data, maybe certain groups were not using the internet, was not putting that information out there. Certainly a lot of, native cultures, we have oral traditions, we have things that are written down on paper that may not exist on the internet. So I think, the concern here is that you have a lot of people who are underrepresented or other groups that are overrepresented when you start talking about cultural information. And so how can you kind of mitigate that risk? AI can be fine-tuned. So as Greg talked about, if you had your own private AI, you have all this control. And so you can fine tune that model to your specific culture or tribe when you have all of that control. If you're not using, a private model, remember, let's go back to those terms you should know at the beginning, that RAG or retrieval augmented generation. You can ground, that's a term you'll hear a lot, ground these LLMs in data that is your own. And what happens is it consults the LLM for this information, but before it gives you a result back, it also looks at this grounding data or these documents or these other things that you've kind of put in there to help it augment or better represent the way that you want the LLM to represent when when it's generating data. So just know that often native cultures are underrepresented in these LLMs. Let's talk a little bit about next steps and takeaways, Greg. I know this is something a lot of people want to know. I think we've hammered the point home enough today, but just know how different AI providers are using your data. If you are using the free one, it's danger, danger, Will Robinson for free tools. Great for generating email or something like that, but not great for your org. I think that's been said. Developing AI policy, I think a lot of orgs are like, how do we put the brakes on this? How do we stop this? Like, whatever. I think as Greg showed, people are using it whether you want them to or not. So develop a policy, what they can use along with what they can't use. You can see a call to action down there, connecting Arctic IT. We have a sample AI policy that you can start with. It's not an end all be all. You'll want to, craft it to your particular org, but it has in there like, hey, these are the things and these are the use cases that it's okay for you to use AI in our tribe. And then, Greg, what do you think about, like, you talked about top up and bottom down, like, how do you get that committee or community, I think you've said before, of people in
Yeah.
your org?
So I think this is really no different than any kind of change management, right? Like, so if you've ever read something like Who Moved My Cheese or those types of things, this is just another change that's coming in. And just like any change management, you need executive buy-in, because that really hurts. If you don't have executive buy-in, it makes it very difficult. But you also need like champions, people who are really excited about it and people who want to implement it in their areas. I've found, I think the best way to do it is to have a mix of people on some kind of a committee, of people at each level, maybe an executive level, maybe at a frontline manager, and then the people that are actually using it, and then coming through. Because I think without kind of all of that buy-in, you end up with a little bit of distrust isn't probably the right word, but I can't think of a better word, of just like, well, they don't want me to use this because they want my job to be hard, or they just want to use this because they want their job to be easy. And that's not really the case. And so I think whenever you talk about like the different use cases, you start to understand how things go. And then I would highly recommend starting in one specific area and then getting and hopefully with one of your champions, one of the people kind of on the front lines that are going to be using this or like using it every day, get it working really well in their area, or maybe start with two areas. And then once that's, then they become your people that are telling the other people in the organization, like, because there's trust, right? Trust amongst coworkers of like, this is making my job so much easier. What used to take me 8 hours is now taking me 2. What used to take me 6 hours is now taking me 4. It's just those types of gains to really build use cases. And I think then it's very easy to kind of spider out to the rest of the organization.
Yeah, and I think what you said, I think there's still a human element to all of this. So you and I've called it like a force multiplier, difference between using a backhoe and using a shovel. Both gets a hole dug, but one gets it done faster. So
Yeah.
I think that's about it for us. One other thing, just for interest to the group, maybe. I think, Greg, 90% of the images that you saw today, certainly not this one, but the other ones, were all generated with AI that you had done,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, they
So
were. So generated with a tool using Midjourney. I would say I actually thought of one thing when you were talking, Phil, that I'd just like to throw in. I think the two things when you're talking about implementing it internally, I think there's two ways to talk about AI because again, AI can be concerning. So I think one is you said force multiplier. Like we're not trying to take a department of 2 down to 1 or a department of 5 down to 3. What we're trying to do is take a department of 2 and let them work like a department of 3, or let them work like a department of 4. Take a department of 3 and give them the capabilities of a department of 5. And so AI is a force multiplier, and it's not a person replacer. It is a task replacer. So think of those tasks that you don't like doing, those repetitive tasks, those things that are boring or mundane. That's where we're putting AI in to kind of free up humans to do things that humans are better. And so I think that's the right way to have kind of this conversation when you're coming into your organization.
All right. Well, thanks, Greg. I think that's it. Michelle, we have any questions?
Yeah, we do have one to start with. It's asking, are you working with any clients to establish an AI framework or policy to govern AI use cases?
Absolutely. So, if you want to send a message again, connect at Arctic IT, we can absolutely do that. Greg's meeting with people every single week. We can make that available. An introductory call about how you at your specific org should be looking at these and creating frameworks for your org. It's really important to get that policy out there because again, I'm just saying people are using it whether you want them to be or not. So create a policy, tell them what they can do, tell them what the use cases are that are allowed and the ones that aren't allowed, and then hold them accountable to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things is that just because I have these calls probably 2 or 3 times a week with different organizations, and um, there are a couple of things. One is get the free AI tool or the AI policy, tweak from it. And then we do offer as well just a call, like a free call where somebody on our team will be able to talk through, spend 45 minutes or so, 30, 45 minutes with the company and let them know if this is something that they need help with. Some companies can do it totally on their own, and that's amazing. Some companies need some help, and we can help them with it. So yeah, that's something we can definitely help with for sure.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting, Philip, what you were talking about with the culture piece related to, using AI and, so many tribes, especially when it comes to their language, it's such a key piece in why they are a sovereign nation. So it's super important, that culture piece and the sovereignty and all those things. I can see where it would be, make tribes a little nervous, but then understanding it and setting your policies in place and just knowing and leaning into it to use it as a tool versus thinking of it as something that's coming after you, I think is an important distinction.
Michelle, I'm super excited. I don't know exactly how it's going to transpire, but I think it can help tribes preserve their culture now. So because it can learn and predict and those kinds of things, we can preserve both culture and language. And I'm not sure how that's going to transpire, but it makes me excited, especially when I go visit tribes and they're like, well, only 2 people, still know the language or whatever, right? So how could we take that, harness it, put it in an LLM and help preserve that for generations to come? Yep. So that makes me super excited.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that piece as well. I don't see anything else coming through. If you have any questions, make sure to use that chat. I feel like this is probably not the last time we'll hear from our friends at Arctic IT about AI and how it's going to improve processes and all the things within tribes. So I'm anxious. I would definitely encourage you guys to reach out to the connect at Arctic IT email. I put that in the chat just in case anyone wanted to copy that over. And I put Greg and Philip, I put your emails in there as well in case anybody wants to reach out. And of course, you can always reach out to us at contact us at tribalhub.com, and we will make sure to put you in touch with the team over at Arctic. So,
yeah, and just one other thing, if you're super interested in, because this is changing so fast, when you said it won't be the last time you hear, right? Like if we had gave this presentation 3 months ago, it would have been completely different. Right. But if you're following that and you really want to stay up to date, Greg does this 2 weeks in AI on his LinkedIn. So a little 2-minute kind of blurb of what's been changing in AI. So you can find that on his LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's a
Oh,
nice,
that's
nice
awesome.
shout out. I missed the last 2 weeks because I was actually on a really nice vacation in Australia, but I'll be picking that back up. So if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I do update on what's going on in AI pretty regularly, and hopefully give some tips and hints on how to use some different tools as well.
That's awesome. I will definitely be following you for that reason. So that's very
It's
cool.
it's a good little video. So,
Yeah, awesome. All
well,
right,
thanks
well,
for hosting us.
yeah, absolutely. All the time. I love when you guys are on. It's just always such great content. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Again, any questions, please reach out. Don't hesitate. Look for this recording in your inbox tomorrow, and feel free to share it with anybody on your team who may not have made it today. And with that, thank you guys, and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks so much.
You
All
all.
right, see you guys.